Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Woo-hoo.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Conversations with SOTU. I'm Josh Schwartzbach.
And I'm Adrienne Metcalf. Josh is a professional medium, and he channels a consciousness we call SOTU. We've been doing this for about 20-some years, so he's very good at it, and it just takes him a few moments. As you see, he'll slip into this state very easily, and we'll have a conversation with SOTU. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can simply go to our website and send questions in for SOTU on our contact page, www.conversationswithsotu.org. And as SOTU would say, question everything they say and decide for yourself if it rings true. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Here we go.
All right. Here we go, everyone. All right. Well, we are SOTU, and we welcome you to another journey through the infinite realms of your imagination. Welcome, dear ones. We are here today to speak to you a little bit about the dynamics that are occurring in your world and perhaps can make a little bit of sense about the energetic dynamics and the extreme chaos that so many of you are experiencing now. Last time that we spoke, we were speaking a little bit about the history of humanity in a metaphorical sense. We also wish to clarify a dynamic that when we use the word dynamic, we are speaking about a signature of energy. You create your reality through your thoughts, your words, and your feelings, and the dynamics are that often in your world what happens is that so many unresolved thoughts, so many unresolved feelings are projected out into your world through your own, what shall we say, confusion and your own feelings of chaos. These energies go out and they form with like energies. And so when we speak about a dynamic of energy, we are speaking about a dynamic that has a specific signature, even though we may not go into the dynamics of what that signature is at the moment. All right. Adrienne.
Well, last week, or last show, let's say, we were talking about the origins of the battle of the sexes.
Yes, we were, weren't we?
And there's so much more to talk about there, and it's playing out to this day, so
well, and
let's
that's
explore.
The thing that so many of you do not realize, that the energetic dynamics that we describe are absolutely still playing out today. Everything that is occurring from the dynamics of male and female and gender interaction, with all of the ambiguity and the amorphosis of sexual identity these days, with all of the dynamics of, what shall we say, religious separation. You know, it's almost as if you are, every time you begin to come together in a certain way, something occurs in your world to keep you energetically separate. Now, you don't have to understand this, but it would serve you to understand that the dynamic that is occurring in your world and has been occurring for about, from our perspective, about 250,000 years. This whole dynamic of energy has been one of separation, has been one of moving into the dynamic of individuality. Because that was the purpose. As we spoke about in the past two sessions, in the garden experience, You had a collective relationship with the divine. There was no separation between any of you. There was no separation between you and nature, and there was no separation between nature and spirit. And that dynamic of oneness, it is almost like the organism that was earthly humanity. The cell had grown enough that it needed to separate, that it needed to move, so that it needed to become more. Because the purpose of the journey in the first place was to take that collective relationship with all that is, that knowing of your belonging, that knowing of your place in the universe. It was taking that dynamic and moving to a place where you as individuals have that connection with the divine, have that connection with spirit, have that connection with nature. And we wish to tell you, dear ones, from our perspective, you have done that. And you have perhaps, as we have said last week, the pendulum has moved perhaps too far in the other direction. Now you must realize that the challenge of your day is to retain that hard-won, that hard-fought individual nature, that relationship, that individual relationship with the divine, and while not losing one iota of it, to come back together and to reconnect as a species. So the dynamics, we are getting around the battle of the sexes. The dynamics of the battle of the sexes, as we alluded last week, occurred because of the dynamic of separation. Now, if you understand that even back in the days of collective consciousness, collective awareness, you would still, the dynamics of movement beyond life, from lifetime to lifetime, was much easier, was much less traumatic, was much less difficult. And so you would live and die and reincarnate in a very easy sort of manner. And sometimes you would incarnate in a masculine body, and sometimes you would incarnate in a feminine body, just as now.
Yes.
Just as now. And in that dynamic of, you would have the experience of both. And back in those days, you didn't really forget between lifetimes. So there was somewhat of a homogeneousness, word, that basically occurred from the dynamic of the human experience. It wasn't, you didn't identify so much with the masculine, with the gender of the body that you were in.
Yes.
There, and so understand there was much more of a, what shall we say, an amorphous flow between the masculine and the feminine. And it was almost as if, because of the dynamic of collective consciousness, of collective awareness, there was really no delineation, except that when you were in the masculine body, you would tend to be able to manifest more easily, more quickly. The masculine was kind of the doer kind of energy. And the feminine, in its truest form, was more the dreamer, would think of the new ideas, would always be longing for a little more. Because understand, that is the dynamic of soul that exists in your world. Soul is always urging you to be more. The dynamic of purpose in the physical is to gain ascension, is to gain more growth, is to gain more dynamic of awareness in each individual lifetime. And so that occurred even in those days. That was still occurring even within the dynamics of the collective consciousness. Now, as we have said, just as every child moves and grows, so too as a species did you move and grow. Just as every child needs to separate from the mother and the father in order to develop an identity of their own, so too it was necessary for you to separate from each other, separate from nature, separate from spirit. The conundrum in all of this was the fact that the feminine was urging the masculine to be more. We used the metaphor last week of the dynamic of the masculine would rather just kind of sit around the cave on Sunday and drink beer and watch Sunday football than to actually get involved in the dynamics of dreaming. And you know, and again, you can see these dynamics reflected even in the masculine gender, the masculine, even today. The dynamics of competition and comparison, the dynamics of survival of the fittest were created in order to allow humanity to continue to grow, to continue to be more, to continue to move. It has been a completely divine movement. It has been a completely human movement. Each of you has chosen to incarnate now at this very crucial time of human transformation in order to be able to say, A, that you were here and you were helped, but also B, to be able to help you move as individuals beyond, to transcend your gender, let us say, to be able to claim the dynamic of the dreaming if you are in a masculine body, to be able to claim the dynamic of the doing if you are in a feminine body, to accept the dynamics of both parts of the duality and to begin to, what shall we say, create the possibility of becoming more than you are now, more than you were in the past. And so the dynamic of the masculine and the feminine occurred as we finished up the last session that we did. We certainly did leave you with a little bit of a teaser in the sense that we brought you to that point of separation, that point of understanding that you were an individual. If you understand the dynamics of reality creation, if you understand the movement that you are making, the feminine dreamed a new dream. The feminine dreamed of becoming more. And the masculine said, sure, whatever you wish. And so, understand that you were of a collective consciousness. Understand that that dynamic of movement, that dynamic of growth, led to a place where, as a collective energy, as a collective consciousness, a very strong energy of desire, a very strong, what we would almost call an electromagnetic energy, went out into the universe and just happened to attract a species that would give you exactly what you were looking for. Because what's the easiest way, as we said last week, what's the easiest way to learn something?
Have the experience of it.
Have the experience of it. So understand that a collective consciousness, a collective awareness of perhaps, excuse us, 500,000 individuals thinking and feeling the same thing puts out a dynamic of energy that has a very strong attractor attached to it. And so you attracted to yourself a species that would teach you about that dynamic, that would teach you about a dynamic of separation, would teach you that you were not more than the dynamic of the collective, that you were also the individual. And if you can imagine what it must have been like to be part of that dynamic of collective awareness, and to suddenly, because it happened fairly suddenly be left with only your own little ego and that own little sense of self in a world where you had never been independent. Well, you know, the first reaction was when there's a great deal of pain and a great deal of hurt and a great deal of fear that happens, the first dynamic in human nature is to blame. And the feminine kind of made a vow at that time.
Yes, we did.
Basically, what they said was, we're never going to allow ourselves this level of empowerment again until we are wise enough and strong enough to deal with it in the way it needs to be dealt with. In many ways, at that time, and we're talking about ancient history, of course, we're talking about metaphor, of course, the feminine moved to a place of not wishing to take responsibility. And the masculine, oh yes, the masculine said, you're darn right, we're not going to allow you to have that sort of energy. And so the dynamic of a movement into the strong male as the provider and the manifestor continued along those dynamics, and the masculine separated from the feminine and became more and more and more individual through the dynamics of their own experience, and the feminine became the nurturer and would raise the children and maintain the dynamic of the safety and the security of the family from within the family, the community unit.
Yes.
And you see that reflected even till today.
Even till today, all around the globe, this template of energy exists, and it's what is potentially changing in many places.
Oh, it's changing. And again, it's like we have been saying, you are being inexorably moved forward. You have, you are in a dynamic of linear time, and within that dynamic of the experience of linear time, there is certain flexibility into, timing and the things and the way you create and all of that and what your beliefs are. You are truly, you've been through so many hundreds of thousands of years of this, what we would call your special adolescence. If you talk about the dynamic of, and again, we're just going to reiterate this dynamic just to kind of bring it home one more time. The whole legend of Adam and Eve and the snake, in your Bibles, it basically says that Adam and Eve became aware of their nakedness in the sight of God after eating from the tree of knowledge. Well, isn't that basically just saying they became self-aware? And so the dynamic of Adam and Eve and the snake, and so you might suggest from the legend that the species that you might have drawn to you might have been somewhat reptilian in nature.
More cold-blooded.
Absolutely more cold-blooded. You have to just take a moment and imagine what it must have been like for both species. With the dynamic of direct cognition, you would meld your consciousness with others. Can you imagine the first earthly human that melded their consciousness with an alien, with a being that was more reptilian, that already knew about individuation and individuality? Wouldn't it be a situation where the shock, where the trauma would be so severe as to cause a dynamic of response and reaction that did lead to this whole patriarchal paradigm of competition and comparison, of survival of the fittest?
So what was, from your perspective, a natural movement of growth, of almost, we could understand it as cellular division?
Well, it's more,
because of
but
growth.
Again, use the analogy of the growth of your bodies.
Yes.
The dynamic of the garden was your childhood. Metaphorically, it was your childhood. You lived in a garden paradise where all of your needs were provided. Not because God got us all, that was here providing everything for you, although they certainly in many ways, gave you all of the tools necessary for you to create that dynamic, but you saw the spirit as your father, and you saw Gaia as your mother.
Yes.
And you understood your place, and there was peace. Peace in your heart, peace in your world. It was the time that they talked about that the lamb would lie down with the lion. Well, they weren't really lambs, and they weren't really lions, but they would lie down together. There would not be that dynamic of competition because it was all part of the dynamic of the natural movement and the natural growth. It was paradise. And so there was that energy. And so the loss of paradise, at that point of the separation, we would say to you, and as we said earlier, in adolescence, just as the child needs to separate from the mother and the father, it was necessary for you to separate, to develop an identity of your own. And you have, oh, so many wars, so much fighting. And yet, if you look from generation to generation, there has been an ascending spiral of energy. With each generation, you have learned a little more. With each generation, you have become a little more. So now, dear ones, you stand on the verge of your adulthood as a species. You have been on this long journey of individuation through the adolescence of your species. Now, if you look at your world, we would suggest to you that you're still making adolescent choices. Black or white, either or. You're looking for the literal meaning in things that are subtle. You are seeking to simplify things that are not simple at all. Your soul thrives on complexity. Now, please understand there is a difference between complexity and complication. Your soul thrives on complexity, as evidenced by the dynamics of what is occurring in your world right now.
So we have the opportunity by choice to reconnect, to understand both the masculine and the feminine within ourselves and within others.
Yes. And even more than that, you are reaching a crossroads. You are energetically, through the dynamics of time, you are running out of road. The dynamics of your world are occurring in such a way as to urge you, and if necessary, force you to make a choice, to understand that your movement, that your growth, that the choices that you make now in the next 2 years are going to shape the dynamics of your world for the next 100 years. We will be back in our next show, and we will speak more about the dynamics of the adolescence. We will bring it up to present day. We would like to speak a little bit in our next show about how the dynamics of today relate to the change of the millennium, the reflection of the election in 2000, the occurrence of 9/11, 2001, the tsunami that occurred in 2006, we believe, and the dynamics of the election of 2016 in the United States. We are SOTU, and this has been Conversations with SOTU, and we love you all so very, very much. And so until the next time we close, sending you peace, sending you happiness, sending you joy.
And as I said, if you would like to have your questions answered, check out our website, www.conversationswithsotu.org, and go to the contact page and send us a question or two. We also do live sessions with SOTU in Beckett and on Skype, where you can have some time to ask some unfiltered questions and answers with SOTU. Have that kind of time. And also on our website, you will find SOTU's weekly message called SOTUsday, so that you can keep track of what they're saying about what's going on currently. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next time.
You may say